Hey, what's up, y'all? Good morning. Welcome to Heavy Cardboard. I'm your host, Edward.
I'm Geoff Speare.
All right. So today, we've known each other for a number of years at this point.
Yes, we have.
And Geoff, you may know as kind of our resident high frontier geek, and I mean that with all affection. And you've had a hand in the expansions and modules and all of that. We're going to get to all that, but I figure context to start, right? So we're going to sit and basically talk for an hour and a half, talking about your background and then how you get involved with the whole high frontier world and all of that. So Hi, that's Geoff.
Hello.
So we got our patron drive going on. I'll talk about that later today. Today is just going to be our conversation. So feel free to ask questions. We may or may not answer them. But that said, Geoff, like, tell people some background about you to get started.
I'm just this guy, you know. I've been doing gaming for more or less ever. I think, junior high, high school started with like the Steve Jackson stuff. So
Sure.
like Car Wars, Illuminati. Was introduced to Cosmic Encounter. We played a lot of that. So very, variable player powers and very creative game. That's
Right.
sort of my bag. Then I got lucky that some people I went to college with ended up getting connected to Alan Moon and the Gathering of Friends in the early 90s. So I was...
Way back,
Yeah.
like OG.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
all right, yeah, all right.
So I was at one or two gatherings, and then the one where Catan came out.
What was that like? Hold on, total tangent. I mean, this is fluid. So what was that like to... Like, what was the hobby like then when Catan came out? I'm curious.
Well, it was funny because, first of all, it was like before Rio Grande, right? So it was
Right.
literally all these games, you'd bring them over from Germany and someone would translate them into English. And so there were fewer of them. And it was this very niche thing, right? It was, nobody knew about it. And it was very hard to get the games. And you're ordering from German retailers and, sort of on the internet or you knew someone who could bring games over. I had a business trip to Berlin and I came home with like 2 massive bags full of games because people had given me lists, and that's the only way to get the games.
Okay. So what was it like then when Catan came out? Like, was it...
So
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
It was I walked in because I got to the gathering and I walked in and everyone was playing the same game, and I'd never seen that because like basically as many copies as Catan they could get a hold of, that like they were all in use the entire time. It like just took over.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like I would argue there's never been a phenomenon like that probably since.
Yeah, it's just because the gaming space was so much smaller than, nothing like like there have been obviously massive hit games that everyone's gotten into, but there's so many more games, so many more people that there's nothing has had an effect.
That's fair. All right, so Catan came out, then what?
Catan came out. I'll end. So we waited 6 months to get my German copy because there were no English copies. I got that. I brought it to a local Magic group, and they were all like, "What the heck is this?" And then we proceeded to play it for 8 hours straight. So then I took a slight detour. I moved down to Pennsylvania and sort of dropped out for a while for reasons that we don't need to go into.
Okay.
And so then I came back in the early aughts, back to Massachusetts, but also back to gaming. And so that was around when like Power Grid came out. It was Puerto Rico was out. Rio Grande was a thing.
Yep.
So it was still small, but it was now like there were English translations of things. There was an American market for these games. And so it was interesting to see, sort of how it had grown. And so then, got back into it and reconnected with people. And obviously there's a thriving gaming community in Massachusetts.
Yeah, there is. Well, it's part of the reason I'm here. So that makes sense, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So, and then really it's just sort of been a steady, like buying more games and playing more games and met some particular groups of people. So the group the Monday night group.
Sure, the Bedford gamers, the Joes,
Yep.
Eric Brocious, Joe
Yep.
Huber, Joe Rashanen and company,
Yep.
which all of them have been on the channel before. It's been
Right.
a hot minute, but yeah, okay.
Yep. And Unity Games was a
Right.
big local convention that would happen a couple times a year. And Steph Hodge came through. And so yeah, it was, and that really, sort of just, it was the, sort of, that was the transition from the sort of OG Euro game, right,
Mm-hmm.
which was like sort of intended for a family game, strategic but not super complex, sort of evolving into, what Euro games are now, which is more niche, more complex, the not all, but some point salad-y kind of games, and,
Sure.
and but that so that happened, right? So sort of going through that and seeing things, and What else?
So then how did High Frontier come into the world for you, or your world, as it were?
So interestingly, it was Eric Brocious from the Monday Night Group.
Okay.
Who is not a High Frontier person.
Yeah,
But, but he showed up on a Monday night with High Frontier, the very first edition of it.
I just think that's funny that he showed up on a school night with High Frontier. Right. Okay. All right. Okay. So he shows up with it.
He shows up with it, and it was also interesting because nowadays Eric is known for not wanting to play new games. He actually has a goal to play as few new games as possible, or below a certain number each year. But he brought this new game, and he was like, "Let's play this." And we didn't get a quorum. We couldn't get it played.
Okay.
But I took one look at the map, and I'm like, "What the heck is this game?"
Sure. The map is unmistakable and striking, I think, is a good way to put it, right?
Yeah, someone, I forget who, has said like if you're not sure, like basically if you look at the High Frontier map, you will either know it's not the game for you, or you will be like, I need to play this game.
And I fell in the latter group as well, right? Yeah, so totally. Okay, all right. So you saw it, didn't get it played, eventually got it played?
Well, yeah, so I got a copy.
Right.
And I
having not played it.
Okay.
Having not played it.
Got a copy, sort of worked through the rules and started to understand it. I think we got some first, second edition games in. With the first, second edition are more or less identical, and then I think some stuff was in color.
Okay.
But it didn't really take off. Until until third edition.
It's early. I apologize, but yeah, that was funny. Yeah. All right, so third edition, right? So, which is the smaller box. Like it's not for all, obviously, but it's the one that I know of.
Yeah,
I think as High Frontier.
It was by Ari's Games, and it was a nice production.
Mm-hmm.
And it came out. I forget exactly what year it was, but it came out. And I said, I got to get this, like, I'm going to get this played. So I took it back to the gathering, and I said, hey, we're going to play this. And so we started a tradition of playing it, and we sort of gradually amped up, right? We started with the core, the basic game, and we got everyone involved, and we found people who had played before, of course, and when they, but so we got a group of people who would play it, and we got up to using all of the modules that were in third edition, which is more or less the equivalent of 0, 1, and 2.
There was, modules 0, 1, and 2 in
2
High Frontier for all.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
And there was combat, but it wasn't as involved as the current Module 3.
Okay.
So that became a thing that we would play it at other places, but it was always, and it was interesting because we played it in this particular table, and it was out in the open, so people would come by and see the map, and, so that really, and, over the course of doing that, also sort of got more into the rules and understanding what was balanced. And of course, we came up with some minor variants, nothing major, but just stuff to improve things. But then also,
so basically, house ruling.
House ruling, yeah.
Okay. All right.
But it was small stuff. It wasn't like going off and doing like completely different game. Just sort of like the turn order stuff was a little bit weird. But the other thing we did was just player aid game improvements. So actually. Tao Seti, who is the designer of Sidereal Confluence, he played multiple times and surprisingly taught us all sorts of stuff about how to negotiate in High Frontier.
Really? Tell me more. Right. Sitting down with Tao was an amazing conversation about the birth of Sidereal. That was pretty amazing. Yeah.
So he, we had been approaching it just sort of as a... I would say we were approaching it as an OG Euro game, right? So we were competing, and we were just more or less doing our own thing.
Right.
And Tao is like, no, hey, I had this ability. I have power stat. I can give your spacecraft a boost. If you give me just a little bit, not a lot, just give me a little bit, and I'll do that for you.
Yeah.
And so he started setting up a whole economy. He started and that's standard practice in High Frontier now. I think everyone or lots of people do it, right? But it was new to us. It wasn't, not like negotiation was new to us, but it just wasn't something that we thought about.
Right. It didn't match that type of mechanism into this game.
Yeah,
right?
And it clearly was intended, right? The rules have a whole section on negotiation. It's just we hadn't picked up on it. We weren't using it to the fullest.
Okay.
So he really showed us how to take advantage of those rules.
Okay.
And so that was a lot of fun. It was a real eye-opener. The other thing he had these great player aids. Because one of the problems in High Frontier is the cards are on. You're like, I want to see the back of this card. It's important what's on the back of the card, but I can't look. So he had great player aids that showed that, and I was like, oh, I want to have that. So I took them, I made my own, and changed the format and this and the other thing. But that was also sort of the start getting into sort of the editing of High Frontier related stuff, which was important.
All right. And then from there, how did you then get involved in a more official capacity, I guess, be a good way to put it?
So, to this day, the living rules to High Frontier are published, and anyone can go look at them, and anyone can make comments on them, and they get read and answered or responded to. So, around this time, High Frontier 4 was being produced.
Okay.
And so there were living rules for it, and High Frontier, High Frontier modules 1 and 2 were all done at the same time because they all came from the previous rule set.
Right, because you said 0, 1, and 2 is effectively in the base game, right?
Yeah, or available in third edition. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So module 3 was being worked on, not quite in parallel, but sort of like it was in an earlier stage of development, but they were both in development at the same time.
And module 3 is
combat.
Okay.
So I started just commenting extensively on the base rules, just like trying to make things more clear and trying to improve the organization and because having I knew I had opinions on what helps people learn the game better.
And this is strictly hey, I think this would make it better, consider doing this, that type thing. Just hey, I because you've been working on this now for over the course of the history of the game existing.
Right.
Okay.
But and I also was doing that on module 3. And module 3, I actually got a little more involved because also the other nicer thing was the living rules used to be in Google Docs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they're in Adobe now, which is much better for formatting and accessibility. But when they were in Google Docs, it would be easy to say, hey, I want to move this paragraph up to here. And you could literally just do that as a suggestion, and then you could say...
And then they could look and see. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So for Module 3, like reordered things and did a lot more structural stuff to try to make it easier to understand. And so got more involved in the development of that. And interestingly...
And again, just because you wanted the game to be better.
Yes.
Not because
yes.
you wanted to do this in any kind of official capacity.
No, it was just more because, I was obsessed with the game.
All right.
As happens.
Right.
So in thinking about combat, because one of the nice things about the combat module is there's a whole ton of economic stuff in it, right? Like there's the rules for shooting at each other, but then there's rules for, there's loyalists and independents, and the independents, once the war breaks out, the independents lose access to these things, and the loyalists lose access to these things, and there's ways to address that. And so I said, okay, let's take that to the next level, and what if the war was really sort of economic in origin? So I had a whole set of rules for basically your actions determine whether you're independent or loyalist, and when the war happens, that determines what side you're on. So instead of it being, in the current rules, it's basically random what side you're on. In these rules, it was, the people who did these things were on this side, and the people who did other things were on the other side. And so the war outbreak was more organic.
Okay.
And there was some economic component to it. And then a particular rule for changing the economy came into module 3, and someone else made a comment about, hey, we should make this, instead of like a all or nothing thing, a gradual thing. And the response from Phil was, oh, well, that would be a separate module. And I said, So,
all right. And for those that don't know, Phil is Phil Eklund, the OG designer of High Frontier.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Okay. And so I started writing a whole economy module at the time.
And no one asked you to.
Correct.
No one said, "Hey, Geoff,
right,
go do this." And so why? Seriously, I feel like you're like going from this to that. Like, why?
That's a good question. So in real life, I'm an IT person. I do data and coding and stuff like that.
Wait, in board games, you're in IT? Weird.
I know it's it's very
okay.
strange.
All right.
So I think I like to, take systems and play with them.
Okay.
And so, and like I did that a lot with High Frontier. Like one of the ways, when you're learning High Frontier, it's very, you can just literally just say, hey, like what if I had, like these 5 cards from the deck? What could I do with that? And, like if I had this rocket, where could I go?
So hold on, because that is a different way than I learned High Frontier. So you're saying, literally, you have it set up on your table. I imagine, I've been to Geoff's house, this isn't the case, but indulge me. I imagine there's a room that you walk in and it's permanently, like it has like the table is made of High Frontier. And you walk in, but in a serious note, you have High Frontier set up and you just are like, oh, what if I had this? What could I do? Like, and then you basically are just playing around with the, oh, I wonder if, or wonder what, but like that?
Yeah, like that with a spotlight on the board.
Trust me, the whole room is dark except for the table in my head.
And you got one of those little things that projects the stars on the walls, so
Obviously, I mean, that goes without saying. Come on.
Yeah, except that because I was doing these player aids,
right?
It actually sort of started as a way of testing the player aids. So I'd be like, instead of setting up the board, I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna, I'm just like the second card and the third card and the eighth card, and then and then looking at the player aid, does that give me enough information to put it together? So
this, okay, my this is all new to me. All right, so I'm learning this as we go here. This honestly reminds me of somebody like an Ian O'Toole, that when he does his graphic design, he's like, oh, okay, you put this stack of chits here. Oh no, now the people on that side of the table can't see that, so now I need to adjust it. So from almost a heuristic or a functionality standpoint, you're literally testing your player aids in that regard.
Yeah, it's a usability.
Huh. Okay. All right. Cool.
So sometimes I would pull the map out and
okay.
But far more often I would just be like, hey, I'm gonna look at it from the player aid perspective, and
okay,
and then I might pull the actual map out. I might have a version on the computer and look at it, but then say, okay, I can go from here, just to get a rough sense of it, right? Like, so it's not really playing the game,
right?
It's just sort of like thought experiments.
But now you have it all committed to memory, and so you just do it in your head, and that's that. Okay.
Yeah, that must be it.
Yeah. Okay, so you start doing this for the player aids, and then from that, how does that go from that to, hey, I want to build my own expansion module variant, fill in the right word here?
Well, it's easy. Once you start editing rules, right, you'll say, oh, well, I want to do it this way. And, well, that's your opinion, but,
right.
That maybe it doesn't make sense, or the consensus is to go a different way, but then you've got this stuff that you wrote, and you're like, well, wait a minute, like this is interesting. And at the time, like, they were saying, like, hey, one of the whole points of High Frontier 4 was we're going to have lots of modules, and we want people to contribute ideas.
Okay, so that you felt like that was a direct invitation, like, hey, Geoff, we got something for you. Okay. So, what was the first? Okay, from player aid to first thing. What is the direction you started in then from there?
It really was. It was this economy stuff that came out of Module 3. It also came out of listening to the Revolutions podcast. I don't know if you.
Oh, Mike Duncan.
Yeah,
love
there you go.
Mike Duncan. Huge. Heavy Cardboard does not exist without Mike Duncan. So allow me a little tangent now.
Yeah.
So when I first got into the hobby, I worked in aviation, which is what I did when I was in the Marine Corps. And so working in aviation, a lot of time you're listening to music in headphones or whatever. And I had just gotten turned on to podcasts.
Okay.
And I would listen to the gamut of podcasts. But my very first one that I found, because I'm a guy, I am required to think about the Roman Empire at least once a week, if not more, required.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And so to fill that requirement, the first podcast I ever listened to was Mike Duncan's The History of Rome.
Oh, wow, awesome.
And I loved his dry wit and the whole 9 yards, and the way he told it, little bite-sized chunks. and his episode on Saturnalia lives rent-free in my head. It's amazing. And honest to God, if that doesn't happen, if I don't start with that, I think.
Oh, yeah?
And then from there, I started listening to board game podcasts, cooking podcasts, like everything.
Right.
But the board game podcast, then it became, wow, I'm listening to these, and like Ludology was big back in the day, at that around 2013 or so, and that was one along with the Dice Tower and a host of others, Secret Cabal and all this stuff. But for the most part, nobody was really talking about the games that me and my friends were playing, which is, the heavy cardboard version, the deeper end of the pool.
Yeah.
And so that got me thinking, well, if they're not doing it, somebody needs to, and here you go. So it all starts with Mike Duncan's History of Rome, because Rome. But yeah, okay, all right. So sorry.
So I listened to History of Rome.
Yes.
I'm still listening to History
Revolution.
of Byzantium.
What one?
So what's the guy's name? So when Mike Duncan stopped at the end of the classic Roman Empire, right? And someone else picked up with the History of Byzantium when it moved to Constantinople. So they've been running for a very long time.
Yeah.
And they're up to the 1200s, I believe.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry that I'm forgetting his name. It's a very good podcast.
Right.
The History of Byzantium. But anyway, in Revolutions, which I'm also
which
listening
is
to,
Mike Duncan's follow-up thing that he now has written books in the whole 9 yards. Revolutions, going through different revolutions in history. The one on Pax Porfiriana was my impetus for going and listening to the Mexican Revolution and learning that, it's bigger than just the Porfirian dynasty. It's way bigger. So again, it all ties back to Mike Duncan. So
hilariously, he is currently now doing the Martian Revolution.
I was unaware. This is amazing.
He has made up a revolution and he's podcasting on it as if it were a historical event.
This, again, go listen to... Oh God, he makes a reference to Hoth in one of
it's like once every other episode he makes some dry
one little dry that just is a... Anyway, look, we like big fans. Okay, so he's doing the Russian.
He's doing
Martian. Sorry,
which is hilarious. But in earlier Revolutions podcasts, he had a term called the entropy of victory.
Yes,
and the meaning of that was basically, whenever somebody wins in a revolution, the first thing they do is splinter. And because if you get a vast majority of people and they win politically, the next thing they're going to do is that they don't all think the same thing. They're a coalition, so they're going to split up.
Right.
So that was the thing that started me was, because it's a problem even in the combat module today, right? Like, what if you start and everyone's on one side, and 3 against 1 or 4 against 1? Well, the reality is it doesn't work that way.
Sure.
Like the 4 against 1 will split. So I made rules for that where basically, when the war happened, there'd be a chart. You'd rank people on the chart, and people on this center on this side, people on this center on this side. If that changes, if your position on the chart changes, you could do something that would cause a realignment.
Okay.
And so it potentially made for a much more dynamic battle, war, and addressed some of the issues that seemed to be coming up in Module 3. So that was the initial thing that got me thinking about it. Was a combination of Mike Duncan and that problem in the game.
That warms my heart so much, learning this. Okay. All right. So from making these rules now and coming up with this, I assume you're subjecting the Joe and whoever that plays High Frontier, and I don't know if this includes Jeroen as well, but you're going through, you're writing these rules. Okay, you have these rules now. Now what happens with it?
So interestingly, at this stage, I didn't, because I don't know why. Because it just didn't. It didn't. I think because they were still crystallizing, right?
Okay, all right.
But then what happened is, what happened was the pandemic.
Okay, fair.
Which happened right as High Frontier 4 released, like around the same release date.
Right.
So I actually ended up my first official High Frontier 4 game was on Vassal.
Which is online implementation that doesn't enforce the rules, and it's old school war games technically is what Vassal was made for.
Correct.
Very different than something like Rally for the Troops or Rally the Troops or in Board Game Arena and all that, for those that don't know.
Right, and it supports asynchronous play.
Right.
So you could basically like make your move and then you email the file or you have it in a share or whatever, and then the next person comes on and sees what you did and takes their turn. So you can also play synchronously, but supporting async play, because the other two people I was playing with were in Italy, so
that makes it difficult time zones.
Yeah, and then for for people who are curious with the details, like for auctions and stuff that are very interactive, we would do it more by email or messaging or stuff to get around that. But
that's awesome.
so we played that game and it took a very long time. But so then I said, oh well, okay, now I can potentially, like, I actually went in and learned enough Vassal editing, which is not fun, to put some of this stuff in Vassal, and used Vassal to test.
Okay.
And literally it's mainly just testing solo. So like the module 3 stuff, but then the economy stuff that I'd done, I actually would play out solo games with it and generally multi-chair solo games. So
so you're playing different positions
and
or as different players.
Like boy, does that break your brain.
I mean, that's how old school wargamers tend to solo multiplayer wargames, right?
Playing a module 0, 1, 2 plus house rules game with 3 or 4 players is like,
And I thought Stressbotics Odyssey was a lot to keep in your head. Okay, fair enough.
But so that like, so the war rules became the economy rules and became stuff that got very, well, I shouldn't say very. It got somewhat play tested, right?
Okay.
There were other rules we were looking into. There was a I'm forgetting his last name, but there's a big contributor, Powell. He's credited on Module 4. He had a whole bunch of stuff for discovery and exploration, some of which ended up in Module 4, some of which is still out there.
Okay.
So testing some of that stuff as well. But basically doing that, just sort of like hey, does this stuff just like make sense at a low level before someone else tries to break it? Can I break it?
Right.
So that was really the next step, was just doing a lot of that, and then I was starting to work with Powell. I was starting to work with a couple other people on ideas and what made sense.
And is this just from being in the Discord and learn like, oh, I'm interested in helping with this, or oh, that sounds cool, can I try it types of, like, how again, you're going from, but how did that even come about?
Right. It was the Discord, and it was just doing the living rules editing, right? So like you see people making lots of comments on the living rules. Oh, okay, well, this person obviously is interested.
Powell, Gary.
That, yes.
I don't know how to pronounce that correctly. Gary Key. Gary Chi.
Gary. I mean, I believe. Yeah, I don't know either. So, but that
it's Eastern European, and I don't know how to pronounce it. But
and I apologize, Pavel. But so yes.
Yes,
exactly.
Time Roller over in Twitch. GARYCKI.
Yep.
So there we go.
He's done some other games. I think some of them, at least I know some of them are potentially being published. I don't know exactly what the status are, but he's an amazing idea guy. Like he just has so many brilliant ideas. So, and I'm more of a play with systems guy. So so it was a good combination.
All right.
But so that's and so now we started to move into this period where it was like, okay, what is the next module for High Frontier? And now it was starting to become slightly more official, because it was like, oh, well, you guys have this stuff, and maybe that's the next module, and let's talk about it and think about it.
So Ion reached out then and said, hey.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so...
Ion Game Design publisher of High Frontier for All. So, okay.
Yeah. And so there was a little bit more of a formal review of the stuff that had been done, and the idea was, because what happened to some of my initial, Entropy of Victory economy stuff was that it was tightly tied to a certain vision of Module 3, and Module 3 went a different direction.
Okay.
So it didn't make as much immediate sense.
Okay.
And so I think the idea was more like discovery, exploration, like that side of things was what they were thinking about for the next module.
Okay.
And so, so now we're moving into Module 4. And
Module 4 is...
Module 4 is Exodus, is the
Okay.
name of it.
All right.
The name came about because Interstellar was being done at the same time.
So Interstellar, the game,
Yep.
was being designed by Phil and Justin.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Correct. And it's important to point out that the third edition of High Frontier had on the back of the board an earlier Interstellar board, and there was a solo game that's very different from the current Interstellar. But it was actually, you literally played it with the components from High Frontier, and it was the same concept, right? You're going out to the stars, but it was a solo game. It was designed as a solo game.
All right.
So, so there were a couple of, so being a bridge to Interstellar was one design goal of Module 4.
Okay.
But
Per whom?
per, I guess I would say, sort of Ion and Phil.
Okay. All right. Got it. That's where they wanted Exodus to.
Yeah.
That's the
Right,
purpose of
right.
Exodus.
Which
right.
makes sense,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, it makes it, from a timing and theme, and that way you can do the whole...
And then tying the games together. I mean,
extends the BIOS campaign.
It makes sense, right? From hey, we can sell this, and no, I get it. Okay,
Well,
all right, got it.
Because High Frontier's not long enough, right? You need to play other games.
Clearly, yes. All right.
So, but then it was, and the themes of like discovery and exploration obviously tie really right into that.
Yeah, totally.
So then we sat down and said, okay, we're going to go through this, and so Phil and Justin did an excellent job of distilling is a better word, distilling the stuff that existed and saying, well, this is like the core of it. And so very quickly they said, okay, we're going to there were 6 or 8, some ridiculous number of decks. Boom, contract decks.
Okay.
And so we said, okay. So the themes very quickly became the contract decks, the augmentation of humans into what they needed to be for Interstellar.
Okay.
So sort of what's now the spaceborne queue in Module 4. And then the actual Interstellar stuff, being able to say, hey, there's a starship, we're launching the starship.
Now, when you say this became the core, now at some point, Phil and Justin basically left the design of Module 4 to go design the actual game that is Interstellar,
right?
Which we've streamed, right? Yeah,
right. So yeah, exactly. So yeah, we streamed it,
right?
So yeah, and that was because they were both being done at the same time, because the whole point was to release them at the same time,
right?
So they focused on that because it was more or less an entirely new game,
right?
And I got handed Module 4. I was asked, and I said yes.
Because of all your work that you had done up to that point in
Correct.
volunteering,
right?
Just because we're nerds and like doing stuff like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And yeah, exactly. And so I took on what I would call the development, some design, but largely development of the ideas that we'd all come up with collectively. And we had iterated through a bunch of different ideas, like there were ZITIES, like XITIES, like the other ways of doing the things that Module 4 did. But we said, okay, now this looks like the right general direction, but now we have to make a whole bunch of balanced contracts. Okay, well, I did that, and then like all the other stuff, and playtesting.
Okay.
So groups that I was involved in did 40 to 50 playtests of Module 0, 1, 2, 4 games.
You said 40 or 50 playtests.
Yeah.
So,
according to my records, yeah.
How? No, and I'm not even joking. Like that, because, again, if you're watching this, I assume you know High Frontier, or at least know of High Frontier, even if you haven't played the game. High Frontier is the biggest game I've ever played. It might be the biggest game that isn't a war game, the giant monster war games. I mean, it's a 12-hour experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like 8 to 12, depending on how fast you're playing.
Okay.
And so the first thing that helped was Tabletop Simulator.
Okay.
There were Tabletop Simulator. There's the official one, and there was a unofficial one that had a lot of scripted stuff in it.
Okay.
And so this was all done, and this is again still pandemic, so this was all done online, and so it was very easy to say, okay, we're going to play for 4 or 6 or however many hours, save it, and then do a second session and finish it.
Okay, all right. I guess that makes sense. Doing it online definitely seems easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's easy to it's much easier to make prototypes.
Yeah.
And stuff. So, and obviously all those were were iterations of the game, right? Like they weren't all with the final rule set. They were all, hey, this works, this doesn't, kind of stuff. But so, and lots of things changed, of course, as things do.
Right.
But so I mean, really, shout out to Michael and Space Fiend and COD, the people who were like the core of that group.
Okay.
And played in most, if not all, of those games.
Okay.
Because it was, it was loads of fun, but
it's also work.
Yeah, it was a lot of time.
Sure.
And they got to deal. There were a couple of games where what if we tried this rule? And I'm like, I think that's broken. And I demonstrated that it was broken, and they had to watch. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
But so that was a lengthy process, right? That was,
okay.
I don't know exactly how long it was. A year? It was somewhere. I mean, it was a while.
I would think to play that many iterations even online.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was the whole thing was more, because what would happen is there was that initial period, and then there was a refining period where it was like, okay, this is like 90% done.
Okay.
We had a so there were lots of changes, lots of tweaks, lots of excitement.
Right.
And then, we said, okay, so by the time we got to the end, of course, no game is ever perfect, no game is ever finished, but we were pretty happy with where we were. We had played it a lot, and we knew that it was working. One of the interesting things was, there's a connection to Interstellar, so there's a starship, and you like get fuel for it, and you can launch it. But we found, we set it up so that basically that was the focus of the module, and it wasn't fun, because people felt like it was work. They felt like they had to do it. And so we actually rebalanced it so that it was an option. You could choose to do it, which really is more in fitting with the theme of High Frontier, right? It's not about being forced to do something. It's about, here's a big sandbox. What do you want to do?
Yeah. What I wonder if.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So we got to a great situation where it's an option, and it is a way, but it's not like the person who does this wins, or it's not like you have to do it to win. It's depending on the game, it might make sense and it might not.
Okay.
So we got it to that point, and we're very happy with it.
So I asked this, now you have design credit on Module 4, among others, obviously, but my favorite question to ask designers, developers, however you want to frame that with this, is like you said, it's never perfect. You can iterate it into infinity. What made you say, okay, yes, here, we can release it in this iteration and feel good about it? How did you come to that determination? And I imagine it wasn't just you alone, obviously.
Obviously some of it was timing and deadline and stuff.
Okay.
Also want to say, you're like, oh, I like to ask designers these things. Like I'm like a designer.
Yeah. No, I get it. But still, you had enough of a part in this to where, how did either you or collectively, how did this?
So we had gotten to the point where I had made physical prototypes of this stuff.
Okay.
And we had started playing it in person. So this is where Joe and Scott and Jeroen and other people come in, and so we would be playing it at the gathering and other cons and stuff. And so it got some outside exposure.
Okay.
It got some some physical testing, so that we knew the components actually, which because doing stuff online and in person, very different.
Boy, are they! Oh, oops, didn't realize that. Yeah, right.
And they did a good job of testing and breaking a few things.
Right. By the way, Jeroen is Jeroen Douwman of Splatter. He is a huge. He plays everything.
Yeah.
He's an incredibly smart dude.
Yeah, and he so like the Starship rules, for example, got to where they were in no small part because he broke them a couple times very effectively.
Which you want, right? When you're play testing, show me where the holes are so we can fix them, right? Yeah.
Both in terms of like, oh, this is runaway points, but also just in terms of, hey, if you do this, it can disrupt the game, and so okay, we shouldn't let you do that.
Right.
So so really it got to the point where, yeah, it was just sort of, you get this feeling of diminishing returns, right?
Okay,
it's
right.
it's like, could we make it better? Yeah, but like we'll spend 12 hours making it 0.1% better, and it's just not worth it.
Okay.
Versus, of course, I mean, that's the other thing, right? Is all these games have living rules. You publish it, people are going to find things, and like at some point you just got to say, okay, we're gonna let that happen.
Right.
We'll let people discover things. The good news is that when we published it, there weren't a lot of like, oh, we misprinted this card or we did this.
Right.
That stuff was pretty solid. And that in part was because I was so used to making player aids. I was really good at like,
nitpicking.
This is what this card should be. This is
Yeah,
what this
right,
card should
yeah,
be.
right, yeah.
But so it was really just that feeling of like, not that we couldn't improve it, but that it was just not becoming productive to do so.
And you're like, yeah, everybody was like, yeah, this is good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people were not like, I mean, people wanted to play with these new rules. They were fun. I would say, one of the things was, when you play High Frontier, you set a number of you set a turn. It's fixed number of turns, and each 12 turns is a cycle. That's the way the game timer works. So you can, when you're playing with all these rules, you can play 5 or 7 cycles. And the way High Frontier 4 had come out, to play a 7-cycle game, you sort of ran out of things to do. Some of the early stage things happened a little bit too fast, and so one of the sort of sub-design goals of Module 4 was to change that pacing, and it did so successfully.
Okay.
So people seeing that and seeing that it was working the way it was supposed to was a good sign that it was ready.
Okay. So that's Module 4 Exodus.
Yep.
Where does now, how and what Module 5 comes into existence?
So actually, let me make one code on Module 4. So we finished up Module 4 and said, okay, it's done, ready to go. And then Module 5 work started.
Okay.
And I'll talk about that in detail in a sec. But there was a delay, and so by the time Module 4 was going to print, Module 5 sort of existed.
Okay.
And so Phil went back and said, hey, there's these things in Module 5. I want to make Module 4 work with them, so I want to make these changes to Module 4.
Okay.
And they were not fully tested. And they work great. They make total sense when you're using Module 5.
Right, to tie into Module 5. Right, sure.
But on their own, they made less sense.
Okay.
And so I, disagreed. But that's how it went to print.
Okay.
With those changes. So I produced, and it's on BGG now, a variant. It's called the Exodus 2022 variant, because that was the version of the rules that basically just sort of restores things to that version of the rules.
Before those changes to tie into Module 5.
Correct.
Okay.
And so in my opinion, if you're going to play Module 4, Module 0, 1, 2, and 4, you should go find that variant and use it. You'll have a much better time.
So, to be clear, 0, 1, 2, and 4, without 5, use that variant.
Right.
With 5...
You don't need the variant.
Right.
Five, when you use Module 5, it tells you, basically, like it said, yeah, if you're using 5 and 4, you do these things instead, and they make sense, and everything's good.
Got it. Okay, cool. All right, good.
So that was happening. But now, talk about Module 5. So I had, written a whole bunch of economy stuff, and probably in part from watching Mike Duncan, and from watching other things like, I don't know, say The Expanse.
Right.
And reading The Expanse, which I did first. I was very...
Which is awesome, by the way. I just finished the series like 6 months ago. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Both reading.
Reading and the show are both very good. They're different and good in different ways.
Right.
So I was very interested in that balance between Earth economy and ET economy, i.e. rest of the solar system.
Right.
So I had a whole bunch of stuff about that where, like, obviously at the beginning, everything's centered on Earth. But over time, you would expect to see, like independent economies develop, and they would not be efficient and they would be bad. But if you use them, they would get better, and then they would be independent and all that. And of course, if you're thinking about a war, that stuff becomes super relevant, right? If you have a war with Earth and Earth cuts you off from, their computer systems, well, how do you do Fineo? Like, how do you? So that kind of stuff was in the economy module, along with just the raw economy part of it. So that was what was going into, and then there was stuff with like setting up trade routes and commoditizing patents and stuff like that. But so instead, for Module 5, so there were 3 main people involved in Module 5, me, Phil, and Rogerio, who's a newer designer, and he's been very central to Module 5.
Okay.
And the decision was made to have it focus on stock and companies.
Okay.
And so now in Module 5, yeah, you may be thinking of something.
Yeah.
Some game genre.
So that has to do with stocks, companies.
Yeah.
They look similar to what's over your shoulder right there. Not the game, but the picture. Yeah. So, okay, right.
So interestingly, this is not 18xx or Steam in space.
Right.
Which obviously is the first thing you'll think of when you hear companies and shares.
Right.
Because while the players will get stock in the companies are sort of a sideline to the factions that are actually going out and doing the exploration. So, that's the central focus of Module 5 is that notion of these companies are going to exist and they're going to help these factions do things. And obviously you can invest in those companies, and doing so can get you victory points and currency and other things. But the success of the company, it's like the company can do great. It's not directly relevant to who wins the game.
Okay.
And so the short explanation is standard High Frontier, every turn you get an operation and movement. You get to move all your rockets and you get to do one other thing. In Module 5, you get to move all your rockets, you get to do an operation, and then you get to do a financial transaction.
Okay.
And a financial transaction could be buying, selling, so buying stock. It could be using a company. And the companies do things that you might otherwise do with an operation. So boosting stuff from Earth into space, or things like that. There's other things they do. We don't have to get into the details. But so now your turns become more efficient potentially, because instead of I can only do one thing on my turn, now I can do 2 things, and it's not exactly the same set of things I can do, but
it expedites the main thing that you're trying to do, right?
Right. And so if you're clever, you set up situations where, hey, I'm being twice as efficient because I'm doing 2 things instead of 1, and
right.
Arranging those clever situations is obviously the point. And I want to do it in a way that helps the companies that I've invested in and hurts the companies, and the companies actually do these things. So there is the company that boosts thing, and the company that handles avoiding hazards, and so it's the companies are very specific and direct, and you can have competing companies that do the same thing. And there's of course lots of other detail to it. So it's really interesting. I mean, it's a very different experience because you have to totally rethink how you go about succeeding in High Frontier. The other impact though is, of course, when you have, and actually this goes back to 3rd edition. In 3rd edition, you could get lots of actions on a turn. There were ways to do that, and it was fun, but it really slowed the game down.
Sure.
Because hey, I have you could have 4 or 5 actions on a turn, but which ones do I take, and what order do I take them in, and so the same thing happens in Module 5, where it's like now I've got these 2 things and I got to think. So the turns got longer. And so what they did was they reduced the number of turns. It's a fixed turn game. So generally when you play Module 5, you have fewer turns.
Because you have more actions. You're
right.
You're able to do as much, but over a shorter amount of turns.
Exactly.
But not necessarily shorter amount of time.
Right. I think in general, so the other thing that happened is, so I was involved in the early stages of this a lot.
Of Module 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then, real life sort of did real life things.
Right.
And I just had less time to spend on it. So, I was less involved in the latter half of it. So I'm saying things, and I'm sure there are things that are not 100% accurate because I don't have, Module 4 I play tested all the way through.
Right.
Module 5
less so.
But yeah, so you generally do the same amount, roughly the same duration, but yeah, shorter number of turns.
Okay. All right. So that's Module 5. And then there are 2 other side how do you term them? Tools. How do you
they have an approach. Actually, another backtrack.
Sure. Yeah.
So one of the things we did in Module 3, or I did in Module 3,
Yep.
was I went to Game Crafter and I made a bunch of other player aids for High Frontier 3rd edition, and some of them were just status things, right? So like like what government is in charge. Well, it's hard to tell because it's on this tiny little thing. So here's a card that shows you. Or the costs to sell things would change in 3rd edition. So what's the current? Well, here's a big thing with a number. It tells you. But it also had a bunch of, for all the futures, which are like endgame mini quests that you could do. They're all on these little cards that can be all over the board. So here's a card.
And for those that don't know, that board, it's now small. It's bigger than your average. You need an excessively large table to play the blown up version of it. Right. So it's hard to see is the point.
So I had made those cards using Game Crafter.
Right.
And actually, so when we, I don't know if it was the first stream we did together, but one of the early ones we did together where we did a High Frontier 4 with the 3 components.
Right.
I brought those cards.
Right.
And that became Tool Pack 1.
Okay.
Which is the same set of cards for High Frontier 4. And so the tool...
So again, it's just ease of play, right? It just helps things. Okay. All right.
It's less about new rules and new stuff and more about stuff to sort of, to help you play. I think in Tool Pack 1 there were like 3 new cards. There's just a little bit of stuff, but it was basically stuff to help you play.
All right. And now
so there's a Tool Pack 2 which is going to have some of that stuff to sort of just, I think there's actually some map, like physical things you can put on the map just because a couple systems have been added to the map over time. Not a balance thing, not an errata thing, just, hey, we found a new comet and...
Quality of life things.
Yeah, quality of life or just like, because what's on the map is sort of an intersection of things that are close enough to get to in game terms and things that are interesting. And so, hey, there's a new interesting thing. There's a new comet. Well, okay, I'll put the comet on the map.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And some updated cards in that vein. Then there's an expansion, which I guess is smaller than a module, that has actual new rule stuff.
Okay, so go for it.
So the big one, from my perspective, is one of the things about High Frontier is you get your little crew faction. It's got an asymmetric player power that you get to use. But when you're playing the long game, you don't get to use it until, until you've sort of built your first little space station around Earth, your first Bernal. So we said, and the crew factions were not balanced for the long game. Like some of them are just really bad in the long game.
Okay.
Like the one that says, hey, you get 2 aqua once.
Whee!
Yeah. So we came up with a set of crew cards that were designed for the long game.
Okay.
They were designed assuming that you had modules 0, 1, 2, and 4. And they were actually we were testing them at HeavyCon last year.
Okay.
So they were used in the HeavyCon game we played, and a couple people got to see them. So you get your faction power from the beginning. The faction powers are designed for the long game, and the other change we made is each faction is a single card, has 2 sides, as cards do, and so there's a different ability on the backside that you may switch to when you get your initial space station up and running.
Okay.
So that meant there could be a early game ability and a late game ability that were different and you could balance them differently.
Now, when you say long game, unpack that a little bit.
So long game is a 60 turn game or a 84 turn game, generally using modules 0, 1, 2, and 4.
Okay.
And optionally 3.
Right, 3 being combat, which is optional. Some people love it. Some people are like, not the type of experience I'm wanting to have.
Yeah, for me, combat is very interesting, but it's a once in a while kind of thing. Some people love it and play it all the time. But it's you really have to get it because it's combat, right?
Sure.
You can effectively eliminate people if they're not paying attention.
Space is hard enough.
Yes.
Just saying. Okay.
Shout out to Felix. So that's the long game.
Okay.
And so
got it.
So like you said, it takes 12 hours to play.
Right.
And it's just no fun. Hey, I'm starting to play a 12-hour game. Oh, I get 2 aqua. Great.
So this now balances that for that longer experience.
Yeah, and so there's going to be at least 2 options per color. You can pick one or the other, and then
Okay.
each of those has 2 different abilities, and you can
Short or early game, late game, right? Yeah.
right.
Okay.
And it's your decision with constraints, but you're never forced to switch. So if you like your early game and want to keep it for the rest of the game,
knock yourself out.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
no problem.
Okay.
So there's going to be Module 5 compatible ones as well. So the idea is whether you're playing with Module 5 or not, you will have at least 2 options for each color
Okay.
as to what to be. Because obviously the Module 5 makes some fairly drastic changes to the economy. And so some things just don't work in that context, or aren't balanced in that context.
Right.
I should say. They work, but they're not useful.
Right.
So we're making sure that there's options in that scenario.
Okay. And you said this is in the expansion, right?
This is in the expansion.
Do we have a name for the expansion?
I think it's just expansion 1. I don't
Okay.
think it has.
All right.
I don't
Fair
think it has
enough.
a thematic name. At
Okay.
least
Got it.
that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So that's one thing.
Okay.
It's also got some early game achievements or challenges. I think the promo pack 2 had achievement cards, which were just like, if you go to this thing, you get these victory points. But they're more late game. They're more like go out to Pluto and do stuff.
Yeah, that takes a while.
Yeah, this is more like, hey, in the early game, if you do this, you get some stuff. And it may be victory points or it may be something else.
To springboard you onto later stuff,
To
right?
springboard you, and a little bit of springboarding, a little bit of making people aware of things. Because when you're new to High Frontier, there's so many different rules. There's things you don't think about. So yeah, stuff like that to basically say, okay, like give you a little direction in the early game. And then there's the most exciting thing that people have been clamoring for, which is dirt. I know the chat's going wild right now.
I know. Like,
Yeah.
calm yourselves. Easy.
So in High Frontier,
Yeah.
you've got 3 types of fuel. You've got water,
Right.
you've got isotope, which is like, and then you've got dirt. Because there are rockets, you throw dirt out the back.
Right. If you push it that way,
Yeah.
you go that way.
Exactly.
It makes sense.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And it's great because water and isotope are sort of hard to find out in the solar system, but dirt,
Pretty common.
yeah, got a shovel, we're good. So in High Frontier 4, if you have there are dirt rockets, and you can basically fuel them instantly, and you can get as much dirt as you want.
Just shovel it in and
Right.
you're good. Yeah.
But for component reasons, you're not allowed to stockpile dirt. Like you can put dirt in an active rocket, but you can't unload it and put it in an outpost or save it or store it. And because there are rules on when you have to have someone with you to refuel effectively, it's a little more complicated than that. There's situations where it's like, oh, well, if I could have why couldn't I just stockpile dirt so when a rocket shows up, I could just, So, Expansion 1 adds in the components to do that and changes the rules to balance it.
You didn't design this aspect of why dirt is or isn't. Why wasn't it? Any idea? I'm just curious. Now we're just two dudes talking here.
I mean, I think it literally was a component question of how many of these little beads will we need to track dirt.
Okay.
That's a lot. We don't want to do that.
Okay, that's fair. No, totally. And that honestly, that's a reasonable
I think that's
reason.
That's been said on Discord or in somewhere.
Okay.
That's not a secret. And that's the problem, right? If you use the current rules, you could stockpile infinite dirt, and that's a lot of components. So the rules will tweak a little bit, which is what not maybe exactly what they were in 3rd edition, but something along those lines of, now it actually takes time to get dirt, and you get this much dirt, but you can do it in advance,
right?
So you can figure out when you need it.
Okay, all right, got it.
And again, that's an option. You don't have to use it, but it's definitely something that some people miss. And it's in a game that's pretty thematic. It's a thematic inconsistency.
Okay.
So it's nice to see that sort of balanced out.
Okay.
Oh, and then the other thing that's really important is
I can never tell if this is serious or not until we get the punchline.
High Frontier has heroism chits.
Okay.
Right, for like newbie miscalculation and
sure, yeah. It's basically voted on by the players, right?
Yes,
like,
yes.
Be like, it was a marvelous fail. You get that, right? Yeah.
So they're going to include some of those chits for experts.
Okay.
So there's going to be expert miscalculation. So you should have known better, but you still made this mistake.
Okay.
But these are going to be more flavor than, because the newbie ones you get victory points for.
Right.
These ones are going to be more like, you
put it on your wall.
Yeah.
I got you.
Littering. So if you dump a bunch of stuff at a site, no, you littered. And my favorite is the award for busting Hertha, which is one of the asteroids, because as we say, it's not a game of High Frontier until someone busts Hertha.
Okay. I mean, obviously.
Yes. It is almost inevitably someone goes to it, and almost inevitably they fail. That's just the way it works.
Okay.
Even when they should succeed, it's just the dice hate them.
Right.
So those are going to be in there. Those are good for a good laugh.
Okay.
I think, and there's going to be some co-op stuff, which it didn't come from me. I'm not that I won't be involved, but it didn't come from me.
Okay.
But yeah, I think if you want to play the long game, a module 0124/5, the crew cards will be good, and will make a material difference.
All right. You still enjoy it?
Oh yeah, I definitely still enjoy it.
So what's the appeal? Why High Frontier? No judgment here. I know it's just why though. Like, what is the appeal? Because it is so different than anything else in this hobby.
Well, and that's one of the reasons, right? It is not like other games, but I mean it's a really good combination of theme and good gameplay, because a lot of Ion/Sierra Madre games have great theme, but it's fun to play. But the gameplay is it's not bad, but it's not competitive. High Frontier is like there's a competitive game. You're doing stuff. The stuff you do is it's like affects whether you win or not. You then get random things happening to you, but you feel like you're going out in space. Like you feel like you're powering a rocket. You get that, like, I'm exploring space. I'm going to the far planets, and that theme appeals to me. And it doesn't seem less thematic the more I play it. If anything, it probably seems more thematic. The fact that all the cards are built using like real science,
right?
They're all stuff that,
even if they're theoretical, like it's
but it's like theoretical. Like, okay, we made this assumption, and we did the math to see what the thrust would be, or what this would be, how much energy, it's all that stuff. So it has that realistic feel to it, which again helps with theme. And there's a lot going on. Like, that's the thing, is that like it never gets to the point where it's just, I know exactly what I have to do for the rest of the game, no problem. Like, there's always like, I better not do this, I better not do that. You have to manage so many different things that
and risk.
Yeah, and risk.
Right. Because space is hard, and
and things blow up.
Right. Yeah.
It happens. So that it's definitely continues to be interesting and challenging. So I think there's always, because it's a complicated game and because the rules are not perfect, there's always that challenge of how can we make it easier to understand,
more approachable.
Yeah, more approachable. I mean, yes, exactly.
What would you say to people where they're like, a 12-hour game where I can spend all these hours trying to do this thing, and I roll the die, womp.
Don't do that.
Fair. All right.
I mean, it's interesting, actually. One of our players frequently plays High Frontier with the goal of not making any rolls.
Okay, because again, it's all about mitigation.
Right.
It's just time, effort, and all of that. Right?
Because invariably, when he makes a roll, he fails it.
Okay, well, there's something to be said for consistency.
So I mean, you can play a very risk-averse game of High Frontier. It's it can be harder in some respects, but there's no risk.
Right.
So.
Or very, very low. Right.
But the bigger thing I would say is the long game is 12 hours or whatever it is.
Right.
If you play the base game, it can be, I mean, once you know what you're doing, it can be 60 to 90 minutes. Your first game could be 2 to 3 hours. And so, there's lots of space in between those two for...
and this is where adding the modules in comes into play.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And even like it's surprising to me playing the long game with 2 people is really fast. It is.
Keep this in mind. This is Geoff, who's the resident expert, saying this, but relatively fast.
Because I think it's because there's, I'm not know why it is exactly. I think it's just because there's less to think about, right? There's only one other person.
Well, and there's less downtime because less players. I mean, inevitably, right? Yeah.
And the auctions go faster because there's only 2 people bidding.
Right.
But so, because like a 12-hour game might be 4 people. A 2-person game could be like, 4 to 5 hours with everything.
And what about a 6-player game?
I did that once.
Yeah. So I think it was Jakob in chat referenced something that you said about the 6-player.
Yeah, 6-player is if you like High Frontier, you should do 6-player once. But like the big challenge. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of downtime, but it's also like you get like patent scarcity. Like some of the decks will run out. And if you don't have the cards that you need, you will not have an option because there won't be any more.
Right.
And with 5 players, that happens a little bit. With 6 players, it happens a lot.
All right. So what is your favorite? I don't know a favorite. When you guys play at the Gathering of Friends, right? You, Jeroen, Joe, so on and so forth.
Lou,
right? Yeah. And Lou, right. Player count and what's your ideal setup?
So I would say 4 is generally like to me it's probably 4, then 3, then 5.
For player count? For
player count,
okay.
Yeah. And 5 is fine. It's just a little bit longer. It's just so like 4 probably optimizes that. You get good diversity, but the length is about where we want it.
Okay.
We'll play modules 0, 1, 2, and 4.
Okay.
We've been using the new crew cards.
That you were talking about
in
the expansion
for a little while now.
Yeah.
We before we used those, we actually used promo pack 1, which had a station fall tie-in. So
that's awesome.
So the station from Station Fall is in High Frontier in low orbit, and at some point it falls, and it may or may not fall actually. And if it falls, it just goes away. If it doesn't, then Project X shows up, and there's 6 different cards, so you get a different wacky project.
Okay.
Which is just funny. But weirdly, the main reason we used it is that the other rule is if you have your crew on the Station Fall station, you get your faction privilege. So it was a way to get around that restriction of you don't get your power early in the game. So that just made it fun. But in part, we came up with the crew cards to avoid that issue, so we started using those instead.
Okay. So four players ideally, modules 0, 1, 2, and 4.
Yep.
The new crew cards.
Yep.
What else? Anything?
I'm trying to think. We use the Exodus 2022 variant of module 4.
Right, because you're not using module 5, so
Correct.
therefore, right?
Correct.
Okay.
We have not. We need to do a module 5 game. We will at some point do a module 5 game. Just we did one early on, and we said, hey, we're going to wait until it's a little bit more of a final state, which I think it's in. So we need to do that. And I don't have a physical prototype, so I haven't.
Gotcha.
Haven't done it. And there's because you've got to make a stock market, and there's just more to do. And I just was like, I don't have time.
Okay, fair enough. Because real life.
Yeah. I think that's it. We don't really play with a lot of. We don't need to play with a lot of house rules other than the module 4 variant. We pretty much play it as printed. Obviously, it changes a lot because living rules.
Right.
So we do try to play with the current living rules.
Okay. And how long does that go for usually? I know the answers. These are softballs, but that's okay. Because I'm at the gathering and I go by the room. I check in a couple times throughout the day.
Yeah.
How are things going in space? And
I would say 12 hours is about the number. 12, and that's with we'll order dinner and like there's a little bit of food break in there.
Right.
Yeah, about 12 hours.
And snack of choice?
Snack of choice. Well, I mean, pizza is the dinner, actual dinner food.
Yeah. Right.
Snack of choice. That's a really good question. Actually, it's probably donuts in the morning.
Okay.
And cookies in the afternoon.
Okay. There you go.
So sugar.
All right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the brain's a muscle. You got to give it, food. So, all right. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. I mean, other than the fact that I heard you did sort of a long stream recently. So
yeah, last night that was I have two last things to talk about, and then we'll wrap it up. But number one, Stressbotics Odyssey. Geoff had never heard of it. And hold on, wait. You like unique?
Yeah.
You like kind of wacky and thematic. He's like, you're bringing Stressbotics Odyssey to the gathering, right? I was like, yeah. He's like, so when we're getting ready for this, for the last 20 minutes before we go live, here's Geoff. Oh, all right, yeah. So, that's kind of cool. That's fun. So, yeah, we're definitely going to bust out Stressbotics. And he's like, okay, yeah, you seem into it, right?
Yeah.
And the second question, is the table big enough? Number one. And number two, we going to run it back? High Frontier.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, like, you know, gotta do a real long stream.
So here's my question. I'm the weak point in this game because I obviously play it once in a blue moon, right?
Sure.
But of the local group,
Yeah.
we could have you, Joe,
Yep.
and maybe a third,
Sure.
and then I just basically, I'm camera boy in that regard.
Yeah.
What do you think to that idea?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I bet Lou would do it. He's a regular.
Right.
But I know there are other people who would be interested. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. That would work. I think it would. I mean, it would go. You know, it probably wouldn't break the record. It would probably be a shorter stream.
It would, because I'm not the slow point. Now, I'm not volunteering anybody for this, but depending on timing of things,
Yep.
and if Jeroen's able to make it to HeavyCon this year,
Yep.
call me biased. No offense, Lou, but I would love for Jeroen to be the third in that, and I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it would. I mean, yeah, he's always fun to play with.
Yeah, and you guys get to actually watch him crush. Oh, does Jeroen ever not win?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
You say sure, like it's...
I mean.
And again, that's not to diminish you guys. Just my experience with Jeroen is basically, outside of the rare occasion, he just wins everything he plays.
He is a very, very smart person, excellent game player.
Yes, he is.
And he definitely. I mean, so we've been playing this in-person group for a while,
Right.
And he wins, Lou wins, I've won. Yeah.
Okay. So there you go.
I won't mention any of their names. But,
Right, yeah, no, I hear you. So, yeah, no, I hear you. Samuel says you can't be camera boy. You're the man that we're all attached to. I get it, but so look, I realize you guys enjoy watching my head just burst into flames, but from I want to show off the game, how well it can be. Now, I've already done a stream that I've been a part of, so now being able to do a higher level, if you will, and it's just a matter of making everything fit and scheduling, but that is something that I would like to do sometime in 2025.
I mean, I would do it either way. I'd be happy to have you play.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to have you be camera boy.
Right.
That's really sort of between you, your stream, and your table.
Yeah, no, I got you. So yeah, we're the hope is to make that happen.
Oh,
So yeah.
I have one last thing.
Sure.
You made me think of it. Because the only problem with playing here, we have to use the small board, right?
Right.
When we play at the gathering or the conventions, we use the big board,
Yeah.
and that's my other minor obsession with this game. We use the all Lego components that I made.
So if you follow me on social media or you're a patron, I promise I'm going to do I'm going to do a thread to where I want to actually show off your ridiculous. And again, it's a compliment, but you're ridiculous tricking out of the Lego High Frontier.
Yeah,
Stuff.
it was a lot of Lego. It was a lot. And to be fair, someone had done a 3rd edition version of it, which I built on. So
Right.
like not all the designs are unique to me, but I did build some new stuff for 4th. So
Right.
it is definitely cool. And yeah, that's the other two things that they're coming out with is an insert, which I don't know much about because I have so much stuff that I can't use any standard insert.
Right, sure.
And a market stand, which is like a thing that just holds up the cards that you can available for bid. And we used one that I 3D printed, but it's just nice because it's a table space saver.
Yes.
And it gives you sort of just easier to see the stuff that it's obviously very important because auctions are an important part.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of my power grid. It's
Yeah,
basically
right.
to where it has but I do it laying down because cameras. But same idea, right? And just less table space.
Yeah, and we wouldn't use it if we're streaming, obviously, for some
Right.
reason. But when we do it in person, it's nice because it just saves table space and makes stuff easier.
Yeah, so the Gathering of Friends, late April. I'll be posting a whole bunch of pictures about that.
There you go.
Yeah, so all right, awesome. Thank you for doing this today, man. I appreciate
my pleasure.
it. I'm excited. Your enthusiasm is infectious when it comes to this, and to be fair, you don't play High Frontier to the exclusion of other games. I mean, basically anything space related. Looking at you, Terraforming Mars, and others, right?
I play non-space related games too.
Yeah, you do.
We do a lot of Seventh Citadel. But yeah, I definitely like the space theme, and a good space game gets my attention. So.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Geoff, thanks for doing this. Y'all, thanks for hanging out. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. Consider supporting the show, patreon.com/HCHQ. I will be back in an hour and a half with Joshua Acosta and the HCHQ crew. We're doing back-to-back Age of Steam maps, both of which are Neon Comet. So Joshua is half of Neon Comet, him and Hero.
There you go.
So I actually have them being pressed down right now by a bunch of games. Hopefully they will lay flat, and I'll see y'all in about 90 minutes. I'm Edward.
I'm Geoff.
Y'all have a good one. Thanks for hanging out. Bye, y'all.